Many churches I know struggle with quantifying success when it comes to their digital efforts. Maybe a pastor asks, hey, why do we have a podcast? Or what's the point of a YouTube channel anyway? So if you hear a question like that and struggle with the thought of how to respond, you're not alone. And by the end of this video, you will know how to answer those questions, and you'll have a 3-part framework to measure every digital decision you make.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools, the show to help you share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by Brady Shearer.
I got a tweet a couple of days ago, Alex, from a person in Pro Church Nation, and it reads, I quote, "We are starting a podcast here at the church and have been asked by the lead pastor to present some metrics on how we will measure quote-unquote success in year one. Any thoughts?" This comes from @AlexEly, EHLY. I responded to Alex and I said, quote, "That would largely depend on what your church is trying to achieve and how your church measures, quote unquote, success." The heart of what Alex was saying in that original tweet was, we want to do this new digital thing because we think that podcasting is huge and everyone else is doing it, so we think we should as well. But my pastor, who's likely not as entrenched in the world of podcasting, is saying like, well, okay, if I'm going to say you can do this and we're going to invest resources in it, how are we going to measure it to prove whether or not it was worth it and to say, yeah, this is actually contributing to our church's overall goal?
Yeah,
to which
so
I
like,
responded,
is success a certain number of downloads, a certain number of subscribers? How would you come to a metric to be able to prove to that pastor 12 months from now that what we did was worth it?
To which I responded, well, pastor, like, what are we trying to accomplish as a church? Because I would love for this podcast ministry to tie into what the church is trying to accomplish.
Just like every ministry should.
Can you quantify for me, when you get on stage on Sunday to preach, how do you measure success with your preaching? And we have talked in many different episodes at length about how to quantify growth at your church, how to measure success, how to like quantify, is what we're doing actually good or
Spoiler
is it
alert,
bad?
it's not just butts and seats.
Absolutely. But I could tell kind of like in this interaction with Alex that he was a little bit, I think, unsatisfied by my answer, and he was hoping for something a bit more specific and granular. And so we wanted to take this podcast episode, and I am going to assume the role of Alex. Not this Alex, a different Alex.
So 2 Alexes on this episode. One real, one figurative.
Exactly.
Nice.
Multiple
Not
Alexes.
confusing at all.
Not confusing at all. I'm going to assume that role and pretend as if I was proposing to this senior leader, okay, here is why we should start a podcast ministry, and here is why it is going to be successful. Here's how we'll know if it is or not.
What about when I tell you that Alex Ellie is actually my alias on Twitter, and I had to ask you this question on Twitter because I was too embarrassed that I didn't know the answer? Does that...
Sounds like you got a lot of free time, which sounds not like the real Alex that I know.
Okay.
You have been exposed.
I've been exposed.
This also, proposal format, framework, 3 parts, because 3 parts, like the Trinity, let's go. It's not just for podcasting.
Yes.
We're going to use that as a specific example, but if you ever need to like show to your senior leadership or even think about anything you're doing abstractly, like, why does this matter? This is the same framework that you can use. So let's imagine it. It's 3 parts like a pyramid. There's the bottom layer, the middle layer, and the top layer. And the bottom layer is the goal. It's the foundation for your church's existence. Every Christ-following church exists to help people love God, love others, and make disciples. This is rooted in, of course, the Great Commission and the greatest commandments. Now, your church may phrase it differently.
Sure.
You might describe it differently. You might have a pithy mission statement, but at its core, it's these 3 things. Help people love God, love others, and make disciples. Everything that we do should be accomplishing that singular goal.
So you're saying that, so if we were to look at all the ministries and initiatives in our church and see them all as little pyramids, right, with these 3 steps, are you saying that the goal for each one should be the same, synonymous with the mission statement of your church, to help people love God, love others, and make disciples?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So that's easy. So if it's the same across all your ministries, this is the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Now, to be fair, sometimes it's ancillary, like the cleaning ministry that works to clean the toilets and like vacuum the carpets. Okay. You might be like, how does that accomplish that goal? Well, it's ancillary because these environments are important. And so sometimes it's ancillary, but if you get back to it,
Awesome.
I had to say that because someone in the comments would,
Sure.
Well, technically,
Yes.
which I respect because that's how I talk, so that's okay. So that's the bottom foundation. Now from there, to accomplish that goal, you need a resource.
Sure.
And that's the middle level of the pyramid. That resource is attention, which is the most valuable commodity your church can possess. Because without attention, you can't get people to accomplish the goal because they won't actually be doing anything.
Right.
And then the final top level of the pyramid, you understand your foundation, the mission. You have the commodity that you need, attention. And then what do you do with that attention? You compel people to take a next step. And that is the top layer of the pyramid. So if we were going to do this with podcasting, I would go to my pastor and be like, look, I know that the goal and core reason for this church's existence is to help people to love God, love others, and make disciples. Of course, to do that, we need people's attention, which is why, Pastor, we have Sunday services. We think it's important to gather. The Bible calls us to do that. And when everyone is gathered, you can, for instance, deliver your sermon.
So far, I like what you're saying.
20 to 120 minutes, and you share the message of Jesus through, talking. That's a medium, live talking. And that helps us contribute to this core mission. Podcasting is similar because attention on podcasting is huge. And one of the rules of attention is that it's much easier to go where attention is already being paid than it is to earn it from scratch. And here's what we know according to Barna Trends 2018. 23% of all adults listen to podcasts. 42% of millennials listen to podcasts. And 17% of practicing Christians listen to podcasts every single day, which might not sound like that much, but that's compared to 6% of non-Christians of all ages.
So, like almost 3 times.
So, Pastor, we know that podcasting is huge. We know that it's especially huge with young people. And we know that it's especially huge with practicing Christians. So not only do we see podcasting as a medium where a ton of attention is being paid, where that attention has been growing year after year and is projected to continue growing, but it's also where attention is being paid with our target demographic. If you were making this argument or proposal for, let's say, Twitch, where a ton of attention is being paid, maybe it would be a bit more difficult. I'm not saying a Twitch ministry isn't a good idea, but I don't know if the attention is as great there amongst the people that you're necessarily trying to reach. Because I haven't seen data there, but we know that a ton of practicing Christians are using podcasts and are listening to podcasts. We know a ton of young people are. Who knows? What I said about Twitch might be completely untrue. I'm already thinking, shut up, you're an idiot. You know what you're saying.
Well, good thing that you're not proposing a Twitch ministry. You're proposing a podcast. And so far, in this hypothetical situation, as your pastor, this is all sounding good to me. You've come into my office. You've said, hey, I acknowledge the goal of everything we're trying to do. This is our church's mission statement. And I think that there is a great opportunity because of this hyper Christian audience that podcasts have. And so far as a pastor, I'm hearing this, I'm like, yes, this is good. This all lines up with what we're trying to do. And it sounds like you're onto something with the potential audience that's listening to podcasts. So I'm on board so far.
So then we know what we're trying to accomplish. We have their attention. What are we asking them to do? What is the action step, the next step, which will help us contribute to that goal? Because attention is great, because once people are listening and paying attention, we have the opportunity to compel them to action. But if we don't compel them to action at all, then that attention is not necessarily being utilized to its full potential.
Or if you have a goal and you propose a call to action but don't have the attention, there's nobody to take that next step, to take that call to action.
And if you have someone's attention, you ask for a next step, but there's no core mission behind it, it's almost certainly going to be aimless, which is why these 3 things work together. So here are some possible next steps that you could encourage people to take through your podcast. Firstly, you could use an ambiguous type of next step at the end or the beginning, likely the end, where you ask listeners, hey, thanks for listening. If you'd like to submit a prayer request, go to our website at, blah, blah, blah.com and submit your prayer request there. Or you could say, hey, if you want to take this one step further and talk to a pastor at our church, feel free to get in touch with us at blah, blah, blah.com. And that could be an ambiguous next step that you ask at the end of every single episode. You could also do event-specific next steps. For instance, like church announcement promotions, where they're like really timely. That would require a bit more work because you'd probably want to go in and then re-upload a different audio file without it once that event is over. But that could be a next step where at the beginning of each announcement, you say, hey, we've got, the fall festival coming up. Before you dive into this podcast, we want you to know that this and this and this is happening and it's coming up soon. So go to blah and you can get in touch there. And you could use specific URLs /podcast, the way that regular podcasts do with advertising campaigns to prove, hey, you bought this Casper mattress from this podcast listening audience. You could do something similar. So, hey, go to lifeabundant.com/podcast and get in touch with us there. And then you could track, here are how many people came from our podcast, because we know we don't share that link anywhere else.
Right.
So ambiguous call to action at the end, specific call to action at the end or beginning. Or you could also focus on infrequent next steps and just focus on building authority. So that's kind of what we're doing in our current format, where we don't ask for next steps or compel people to take next steps during most of our episodes. Like at the end, I guess, on the YouTube channel, we say subscribe and like this video and subscribe.
Please.
But
Thank you.
That isn't like necessarily the same type of next step, because we're not asking people to buy one of our products, which would be an analogy for our for-profit company. So you could do something very similar with your podcast, where therein listens and subscribers become the metric that you're tracking, because you know that once a month you're going to have a bigger call to action, and that's where you're going to ask for a next step. And it's a much bigger next step, but people will be compelled to take it because they've been listening episode after episode, and you've deposited so much equity into their life that they're willing to reciprocate. And so that's where you might just be thinking is listens and subscribers a vanity metric? Well, no. If you're building an audience based on trust and authority, that over time, as we are exact proofs of, can return a ton of dividends when it comes to next steps because of the attention, which contributes to the goal.
Yeah, and so these calls to action are examples of those metrics that you are going to be able to track to say to your pastor in 12 months, say, hey, remember that podcast that I convinced you last year to start? Well, look at all these conversions. Look at how people responded to Fall Festival using this podcast link. This is how many people signed up for this event, and this is how they got there. It was from the podcast. And so you'll be able to have like very clear statistics, metrics, and say, this is working. The audience that we're speaking to with the message that we're trying to share, they're taking next steps in their life with Jesus on their own. They're taking next steps in our church, and it's because we're using this tool. And so that's going to give you a great opportunity to say, this is working, and then continue to track it to evaluate how it continues to work. And, eventually podcast won't be a thing, and there's going to be another thing. And so you're going to have to,
how dare you?
You're going to see those metrics drop off and be like, okay, we can see that people aren't responding to this in the same way. Now we need to get on Twitch or whatever it is. So these are going to be super insightful, not only just to convince your pastor for this fun new podcast you want to do, but for any ministry in your church. How are things going? How are people responding? How are people growing? And how is this all contributing to the lifeblood, the mission of our church?
And aligning everything together in the same direction is the key here. I just had this idea as you were speaking. I was definitely listening though, where let's say every summer you do, as a lot of churches do, a kind of question and answer sermon series. Well, you could have one of the calls to action, one of the next steps on the podcast for, the months of May and June, where you say, hey, we've got a big sermon series coming up, but we're going to be answering any question that anyone has, no limits. If you go to lifeabundant.com/podcast, we'd love to hear your question. And then you could go to your pastor and be like, look, we got 25 questions from the podcast. Well, how many did you get from your announcer from stage? Oh, 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. This isn't meant to be competitive, but now you're actually generating something that's going to be helpful for him or her that correlates directly to their specific activity within the church. And that would be even a way to show and quantify, because they know how much work they did to get those 8. And you got 25? Wow, the attention there must be a lot different than the attention that I have. Not better or worse, but definitely worthwhile, of value.
Yeah.
And so there are so many creative things that you can do here. This is what you would do for a podcast. If you were doing this for a YouTube channel, on that second level of the pyramid, when it comes to the resource attention, you could say, hey, YouTube is the second most, visited search engine in the world, the second most visited website in the world. It actually has more traffic than Facebook. There's so much attention there. Did you know 500,000 searches are made every single month for the keyword Bible study how-to? People are searching, trying to figure out, and then with the next steps, with that third action level of the pyramid, you can do that same thing. Calls to action at the end of the YouTube videos that you're doing. And so you can use this framework to prove to your pastor, this has value. You can get your ideas approved, and you can help what you're doing make sure that it's aligned with what the church is overall doing. And hey, you might just clarify the church's mission in the process.
There you go. So good.
That'll do it for this episode of Pro Church Tools. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching this video. We recorded these in advance because we're actually in Scotland, traveling right now, eating bangers and mash. Would you bang that subscribe button?
And would you mash that like button?